Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Today y Mañana. I'm Alex. This is Michael. We're very excited to have you joining us this morning on a chilly, but I think it'll warm up.
It's sunny. Today. That's all I care about.
It's a sunny day.
I'm a sun kind of guy.
Here in Charlottesville, Virginia. So that's really all we need is that beautiful, beautiful sun. So we are very excited for that. We have a great show lined up for you this morning. We're going to be joined shortly by Zack Jackson. He is the owner of the Solar Guy here in Charlottesville, and we're going to talk some being a small business, being an entrepreneur, a lot about, just what are solar, how does that work, that process, why is now a good time to think about it. Lots of fun stuff for us to cover today with a local entrepreneur. We'll also talk a little later in the show. Mike and I will talk some banks, that fun topic.
What happened with the banks?
There may or may not be something going on that you should.
Is it time for the old quote that Alex likes to pull from It's a Wonderful Life?
I think at some point today I'm going to bring out the It's a Wonderful Life quote, Mr. Potter quote, to talk about. So it's going to be a blast. We're looking forward to it. Of course, love being here on the I Love CVille Network set. Big thank you to Emergent Financial Services, our presenter, as well as our great partners in Matthias Yohn Realty, Castle Hill Cider, Craddock Serious Insurance, and Forward Adelante, the premier Latino networking group here in Charlottesville, Virginia. So we got some great stuff lined up.
It's a big day for Charlottesville, though. We do have a basketball game today. Exactly. Alex and I are big UVA basketball fans, so we're definitely keeping an eye on that score, even though it's during work hours. We might be checking the score every once in a while.
UVA hoops. Yeah. So play at 12:40 today, and it's Furman. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
I listen. You and I have been talking about this for a while. I think the basketball team's good. I'm not 100% sure they're great. If we go into the Sweet 16, we face Alabama, correct? Mm-hmm. That, to me, is where I kind of really hope that this team would make it. Yeah, win these first two rounds, get into the Sweet 16, and you're an underdog against Alabama, so that's a win-win situation. If you lose, that was the expectation, so you don't feel like you fail.
You're trying to win house money by the time you get to Sweet 16.
Exactly.
Number one seed.
Yeah, and if you beat them, heck, that could be your season, And I think they're going and playing very well. I thought they had a good ACC tournament. Mm-hmm. They got outplayed by Duke, but,
Duke was a very tough matchup
for
them, the way Duke was playing and their size. So I think they got some. I think there's not a lot of teams in the country that are like Duke. Where everybody.
You told me Alabama.
Alabama, unfortunately, is one of them. But there's few teams in the country, certainly not before the Sweet 16, that have the size of Duke where they're bigger than us at every single position. From guard to center. So fortunately, I don't think, short of us running into them, which we can't run into them before the Final Four. Yeah. So I think we've safely avoided them. The question is whether we can take care of business in the first 2 days.
Yeah, listen, our defense has been playing very well. So that means no matter what, we're going to give ourselves a chance to win. It's always a question of shooting. I mean, if our three-point shooting's struggling a little bit, can we generate enough offense from the paint to score enough points? Because usually I feel like we're going to hold these teams like 50, 55 points.
I suspect, between 50 and 60 points.
The only way we lose is if we're scoring under 50 because we couldn't hit a shot. Yeah. Which can't happen. They've had a propensity to do that.
We've seen it happen.
But I hope that they can get some three-point shots down and they work well in the paint. Don't turn the ball over. That's always big too.
I'd say start well. It's always not good as the higher seed when you come out a little slow. So you got to start well. So I think they can pull it off.
I'm really hoping. I think we can make the Sweet 16.
No, I mean, my bracket.
Your bracket is UVA going all the way every time.
My bracket title is always UVA wins. So,
but you were right once.
That's true.
You were right once.
That's true. I once did a bracket.
You didn't get the $1 billion thing, but
No, everything else was wrong. But UVA did win. Right. They did win. I mean, so that's something.
There you go.
That's something. And I wasn't too far off. I had us beating Michigan State. And Michigan State lost to Texas Tech. So I almost had the final right. Yeah. So there you go.
That's because we've always had, because Michigan State, I don't know if everyone remembers, they beat us like back-to-back years, 14 or 15, something like that.
Yeah, I was always worried.
We always had like
Michigan State.
Yeah, we didn't like Michigan State.
But I think we had a good chance.
Yeah.
Good chance. All righty, so I don't know about you, but I'm ready to jump right into our guest for today.
Yeah, it's a sunny day. Let's go solar, right?
There we go. What better day to do it? So we're excited to welcome to the show this morning Zack Jackson. He is the owner of the Solar Guy. Zack, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Alex. It's good to be here. This is my first podcast, so first of all, don't want to set the expectations too high personally. I will set the expectations high on solar, though. Solar is a booming industry, like Michael alluded earlier. It's newer in a lot of areas as far as adoption rate. So what we're seeing in Virginia that makes it different than some of the other states is Virginia has very favorable laws to solar. So this year, not everyone knows this. This may be new for a lot of people. This year, starting January, it's tax-exempt equity added to your home, which we talked about the market earlier. This is a good way to secure that investment when that might be going down in the market. That's a reality. That's something that's hard for a lot of us. We're all kind of seeing different things. Solar also gives us a path to being able to save. Instead of having this bill that always goes up, you get to fix your costs and keep those lower. So kind of curious some questions that you guys might have for me. So
absolutely. I mean, maybe to start, tell us just where, the audience loves, of course,
the small business.
Entrepreneurs love the small business. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you decided, okay, I'm going to start a small business in solar.
Okay, so it's sort of something I always wanted to do, not necessarily solar. My brother actually has been doing it for about 5 years, so I sort of got a peek into it before I ever jumped in. I always wanted to start my own business, though, and I've always been entrepreneurial. The only thing is I think like many of us, and a lot of people can relate to this, there's a feeling of security in a job, plus there's the whole go to school, get a degree, go work, that kind of security. And I did that path actually for a while, and I always felt sort of like I was living a half-truth. It was a business and IT kind of space, and that's something I'm interested in, technology, business, but it was more so on the employee side. So for me, I've always wanted to work as a self-employed individual so I can chart my own destiny and have more freedom and flexibility. Something that I feel a lot of us in the last few years have had sort of ups and downs. There's been hard things of what's gone on with everything that's been going on. But there's also been a move to more remote, which has allowed people to have more flexibility to think about what they wanted. So for me, I wanted to start solar because it gave people freedom with their time and their energy back. It's something that I don't think is talked about as much as the savings in money. It's really downplayed. So for me, I really got into solar because I was into finance and into freedom, and I feel solar is a path that helps expedite that. You're able to do stuff like compound the return of money you would have otherwise lost. Most people fall under about 30% tax bracket, pretty close, 20-something, 30%. And, buying a solar system, you can end up getting that back now after the recent IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, that was passed. You can get 30% of the cost back that next year. And if your tax liability is anywhere excess of what you were going to pay, then that rolls forward as a credit.
Okay.
So this is a compounding thing that then frees people up to be able to invest in that vacation they wanted to do, to go invest in that other addition to their house. So it's something that I feel really good about because I help enable people to live the type of life that I also want to live. So that's what really got me into solar.
Excellent. So what's it like being an entrepreneur? What's it like to taking that plunge and being the owner of your own business?
Well, I think you said it right, Alex. It's a plunge. It's a plunge. To be honest, I didn't plunge as much as some people did into it. So for me, I kind of tiptoed and stepped into building a solar business while working another job. Which I think a lot of people. Which is a
common story. It's a story that a lot of people have.
And if you're thinking about it, you don't have to do one or the other. You don't have to just be an entrepreneur, and you don't have to jump in necessarily. I will say, at some point, my attention and my priority was spread. I knew that my focus and my heart was not in what I was doing in my W-2 work, and I knew that the path wasn't taking me the direction I wanted. So I continued to, silently quit. The performance evaluations were good, but the trajectory and where I wanted to go wasn't there, and my heart just wasn't in it. And so I kept putting more effort into solar, which I find, there's never a point when you're ready to be an entrepreneur. you're just kind of like, you're going to either walk yourself into a corner where you have a choice to make and you either make it or you don't. And I just don't want to live with regret. So I've failed, I've succeeded, I continue to fail. I like the idea of fail up.
Fail up.
Yeah.
Exactly. You learn from your mistakes.
And there's plenty of them.
Exactly. That's why you can't learn. You can't learn without them,
Exactly.
right? If everything goes your way, you've learned nothing. You don't know what not to do.
You don't know what not to do. That's exactly it. And that's I think the biggest blessing of being an entrepreneur is that culture of it's okay to fail, and other entrepreneurs are encouraging you because they are also going through it.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. I mean, if we take the idea of going into K through 12 and going through a university, you learn a lot of valuable skills, and yet one of the things that you learn that I think can be something that gets hit like right as soon as you get out is the world is not the same. It rewards the ability to pick yourself back up. It rewards that fail forward, and you're taught most of your youth, most people to really think to shoot for like get that perfect, get that A. But they say this for a reason, like A and B students go to work for C and D students, and it's not that that's always the case, but it's more so the root of it is not the grade. The grade is arbitrary. It's the idea that it's okay to fail and that I'm gonna make something happen regardless. So it's really what it's like. It's like a roller coaster. In solar, we call it the solar coaster. It's literally got to turn. Yeah. It's that.
Wow. So going to solar, like, I'm going to be honest, like, my knowledge of electricity is almost close to zero.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, do you know how much electricity, like, the average household uses, and how much can solar kind of contribute to, like, how much
Saving.
to save on that?
So I'm gonna answer that somewhat like a politician.
Okay.
It varies. Every household is different. So you have some houses where you have one person, and they travel a lot, so their bill is very low. Then you have some that are a couple, and they don't even have any kids, but they use a ton of electricity. They host gatherings, stuff like that. Sometimes you have a family though, and then you have the kids that are there, and that often will raise the utility. So a family cost, but it also has a huge amount of benefit. I would say if I give you a number, talking technical terms, it's kilowatt hours.
Okay.
Kilowatt hours, and in Virginia we have Dominion. Dominion is the main one. We have other utility companies in Virginia. Something new to the audience here, probably for some of them, is there's a solar renewable energy credits system. It's basically an incentive to move us to net zero by 2050. Virginia has that goal. It's net zero by 2050. It's like, 30% renewable energy by 2035.
Okay.
Now, just to answer a little bit deeper into that, it's roughly, I would say, somewhere between 12 to 22 kilowatt hours, which is a bit of a range, but that's kind of what we're looking at. And that bill is somewhere between 120 and 300 pretty regularly, and sometimes higher.
That makes a lot of sense for financial planning. Just when people give us the utility bills, it's pretty much it's somewhere between 100 and 300. If you're at 500, you've got a lot of kids, you've got a big house.
Or you got a leak somewhere, and you got
exactly.
Well, listen, when you have little kids, I notice we're from low cousins, TVs are on. You're like, why is this TV on? Even my mother is a little bit like that too. Our mother. Sometimes you go in one room, there's a TV on. Then you go to another room, there's another TV on. It's like there's a button to close the TVs when we're not watching.
Not fair. Better hope she's not watching this morning.
Yeah, I'm sure she is. She's got the TV on somewhere, but she's probably watching two different places.
The TVs are one thing, but those don't use. I mean, they use a lot of energy. But they don't use nearly as much as this fluctuating. I want to be cold now, and I want to be hot now. So change the thermostat.
Thermostat,
and that's doing it, man. Open the window, leaving it, forgetting it open. A bad HVAC system. These are things too.
Drain.
And now there's credits for upgrading a lot of this stuff too. If you're going electric, if you're switching from gas, there's credits in Virginia. So there's a lot of things that kind of, I would say not sympathetic, but they're synergistic to solar. And right now, we saw in the last, we're talking about basketball coming up, but we're also football was not that long ago.
Yep, just
and
ended.
That was a really great game, and in that you probably remember all the commercials, all these EVs, right? You just
Yep,
kept seeing
all the
EVs.
electric. Yep.
But what comes with an EV?
Battery.
But what comes with the cost of owning an EV?
Electricity, you got to power it.
You got to power it, right?
Yeah.
Now, what are people going to want to do once they get used to that? Are they going to want to go sit like some people do at like a Sheetz or something?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Well, you see those commercials, right? They're in like the middle of nowhere, and there's like a power.
Although I've had a problem with that. There was one commercial for the Jeep EV, and they were trying to advertise exploring like the mountains, and then they stopped, and like in the mountains there was like an EV charging station. I was just kind of like, wait a second, when you could drive in like in a national park, this is like a random EV station.
The reality is you don't have to charge that thing at home.
You have to charge at home.
You have to charge it at
That's
home.
That's it. And that's what people are going to want to. My uncle has a Tesla, and he charges it at the house, and he has solar. And the thing is with that is if you charge it without solar, you're still going to save money. The reality is you're still going to save money going to an EV. Now the prices are coming down, especially if you get like a used EV or, you take advantage of those credits in a trade-in. But with solar, it can be like one-fifth the cost.
You're using the solar to charge the car.
Yeah, and you're saving so much. So the truth is that solar is really in its infancy. It's slated to grow exponentially. So what's really going to be a big thing is people realizing that you're either going to go solar renewable energy or you're going to go solar renewable energy from somebody else providing it to you. And that's hard, I think, for people because we're conditioned to just pay a utility bill, and then that's almost like not a bill. It's almost like it's until it's that spike moment in the middle of the summer when it's like, oh my gosh, or in the winter, and you're like, where did this come from? Now maybe I'll talk about solar.
Yeah.
But really, that's not the time for that conversation as much because the reality is everybody's having that conversation at once. And so the best time to be having that move to solar is first early because all of the incentives right now are amazing. You got 30% tax credit, you got cash back that the utility company is paying you. And they're paying you that because they need to be renewable. And until they hit their goals, they're going to pay for your energy if you went solar.
So are they paying, I'm curious about that on the financial side. Because I've heard about the tax benefits, so are they paying you that for when you have solar, like the moment you've done solar installation and you're kind of hooked up with them, they're paying you, or is it on days in which kind of you've generated more energy from solar than you have pulled from the grid, you receive that amount of money back? How does it kind of work?
So of course, so that's a great question. It's actually two. You get two different kind of benefits. So there's the net metering in Virginia, and net metering you can find it on Dominion's website. I posted on my Instagram at SolarFi Guy, on Instagram. But really, it's a one-for-one credit. So you're producing energy. You're producing kilowatt hours. Those kilowatt hours, you're using them. Now, at first, when you use them, that doesn't go back into the grid.
Yeah.
But if you produce, let's say in the summer, you produce more than you use, and it goes back in the grid, you build up a credit. That credit, Michael, it seems like you just caught it. That credit, you get to use that later
on. Okay, so for those cloudy days or the rainy days or the winter, if you're using more than you're producing, it's reducing your bill at that point in time.
That's it, but that's not the only way you get paid. So in Virginia, and not all states are this way, which is why Virginia is so good, along with a lot of other eastern states. Virginia actually have a program with that solar renewable energy credits that I mentioned or SRECs for short, and that is where you actually get paid based off the size of your system for the production that's expected. So you register that system on a broker, and that broker then sells it to Dominion, which Dominion is legally required to buy, continue to buy these credits. And so they buy that, and then that program to use renewable energy, where you get to use renewable energy, but you don't buy solar, which I don't know if you guys have heard of. You can do that with Dominion, and you pay for the privilege to have clean energy. They help pay for that by all of these other things like these SRECs and these credits that they get from the government. So they get these credits, but right now they're growing, but they're not growing to the degree that the federal and state government want. And so therefore right now they're paying for that production. So let's say you have a 12 kilowatt system. You might get like $2,500 as a check up front potentially. I'm not going to give you an exact number. It depends on the market a lot. But you get this cash flow in. I mean, is the utility company, just the way you're doing it without solar, are they gonna give you a cash check?
No.
I mean, without it? No.
Never.
The elephant in the room with solar, though, that I think a lot of people, don't fully understand is they think that it is expensive sometimes when they look at it, and I think it's because people think of it as a new bill. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, if we have a roof that's good, it's not always that we have a perfect roof for it, but say we have a really good roof and it has great sun exposure, maybe a southern-facing roof, because a southern-facing roof, if you're out there and you're thinking about this, southern-facing roof is ideal. East and west is still good, but that
because east and west, is it that it will only get the sun at a certain time of day where the southern-facing roof will get it most of the day?
Well, it gets at an arc, right? So you kind of go like a east to west, south arc. So the whole time it's beaming on that south face.
Yeah.
But you're kind of going around in an arc, so you get that east and west. But when you get 100% offset, which we talk about in the industry, you're covering all of your electricity. So if you're covering all of your electricity needs, and we do that based off looking at your bill, looking at 12 months, which Dominion shows a little snapshot of it, and you've probably seen it. Yep. Now, we look at that average, and then if you can get 100% offset or more, let's say you're planning on having a battery backup or an EV in the future, you might want to oversize your system. Now you're producing more than you're using, you're getting paid for those credits, but the thing is that when you look at it, you're still paying for solar, you're paying a solar payment. But people think about this and they look at it oftentimes, and this is sometimes where it doesn't always click, especially if you're not a finance kind of person. And you just look at it and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to pay $30,000 or $40,000 or whatever for this solar system, and we have finance options, so you can do zero down. It doesn't have to be up front. Mm-hmm. Some people choose to do cash with everything with the market and interest rates. Sometimes that can affect, but it's more of a movement. You move your current bill, which you're paying to the utility company, over to paying a solar payment. Mm-hmm. And then now, instead of this bill that you have no control over the cost, you can fix that rate. And now, over time, it stays the same. You get tax credits. You get all these benefits. You get to know that your air in your neighborhood is cleaner and you're contributing to it. And now, you're producing power. And a lot of people, we're conditioned to be consumers.
Consumers of power,
That's it. I mean, you guys are a finance background, so consumer versus producer, right? Which one normally has more power? And you get to bring power back to people.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing.
Interesting. A couple of shout outs here. We got some people watching the show this morning. Caravella Vincenzo, thanks for watching the show this morning. Laura Smither Hawkins, Clara Kasha watching the show this morning. Elizabeth Miller watching the show this morning.
So I have a question. Again, I'm kind of going a little bit into numbers, but how many hours of sunlight would a solar panel need to kind of generate? Again, I want to use the average household because obviously it differentiates, but how many hours of sunlight does a solar panel need or solar panels need to actually work?
So you need really honestly, I mean, you start getting, as long as it has full sun exposure, you start producing immediately. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you have shade, however, there's different systems that kind of gets into the weeds. Some systems are like a string inverter, like Solar Edge, and to say if some of the shade goes down, it could potentially affect or take out a string, and you may not get the production. Okay. But if you have, like, say, a microinverter system or something to that effect, then if one is shaded and the one is not, then as long as it has full sun, it starts producing. To kind of go a little bit deeper, not into the, but a little bit more direct to your question, the average sun we get in Virginia is about 4 to 6 hours. So with a good couple hours of direct sun, you're getting some really good production. So with Virginia sun, as long as you're not having a lot of shade, that's an issue. We usually have to look at that at houses, but as long as your roof is good, you don't have a lot of shade, 4 to 6 hours, that's plenty to produce the power you need.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
We got an audience question from Xavier because, which finance guy. He's our dad. He worked, so he's always thinking finance. What he says for I think I'm guessing he's thinking for the typical person investing in solar, because you got this upfront cost, right?
Yeah.
But you have future expected offsets and benefits, like
Yes.
income cash flow that will come in.
Yes.
What's a typical break even that you see in terms of years? Where you say, all right, after this many years, I am net positive, covering my initial investment.
So again, you may not like this answer, but again, it depends. So if you have a southern-facing roof or east-west with some southern tilt, you're going to break even much faster, especially on a southern-facing roof, that you have a full 100% offset. If you don't have a full 100% offset, it's a little harder to gauge because you're going to be drawing off the utility. So if they raise the rates, your bill may still go up.
Yeah.
So if you have a 100% offset, or let's say over 100%, like 100 to 110, then you're producing all the energy that you need to use. And if you have a taxable income, which is also key, unless you're doing leasing or a PPA agreement for like retirees, most of the time it benefits those that are working with an income.
So the tax credits are more useful.
More useful, right? Because you have that tax credit offset. So if you have a tax credit, you have 100% solar offset on your roof, I would say you could break even as soon as within the first year to year and a half. However, it's not uncommon for your break even though you may have a cash flow positive, your very first year. It could even be the very first month. You get a cash flow, but like a break even on your investment, it may very well be somewhere between 5 to 15 years.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have to wait for the cash. Eventually, the cash flows then cover the initial investment.
Yeah. So it's multifaceted.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Which I think, what he was kind of just thinking, when, exactly. Because, you measure it also depending. So how does the process, I'm curious, work? Because obviously a key thing is going to be where your house is, what direction the roof faces, what are other maybe potential areas on your property that could make it work. What kind of the process? All right, someone gives you a call and says, all right, I'm interested in this. What's the next step here? Do you come and kind of look at their property and say, all right, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, this area of your roof makes sense? What's kind of the process there?
So that's an amazing question. After COVID and after all of this kind of virtual move, the business partner, so I work with my brother. I'm the SolarFi guy. That's my business and brand. We work with Power as a platform. They have many different businesses working with them. There is virtual tools that a lot of solar companies use, including ours. Basically, think Google Maps and think Open Solar, think these other platforms where you look satellite image. Now, those images might be a little bit off because, as we've probably seen, it's not always exactly up to date. So we talk to the homeowner. So the first step is really honestly a discovery call. So we talk to them and we'll pull up the address and look at the map. We'll look and see and talk to them. Hey, is this tree still there? What's going on with this? Is this roof, did you make any changes, any additions? Do we have other space? And from there, we do things like, this is something good to know. Solar is easier to be approved for as a loan than a lot of loans because it's considered a collateral loan.
Because you have an actual
You have
system.
an asset. You have an asset backing it. So, a lot of people, from working middle class and above, if you have an income and you're paying a utility bill and your credit score is like 600 or 650 or above, normally we can do zero down options. Now, as far as qualifying, we'll just briefly usually touch on, hey, are you over 600? Just as like a question, and we'll ask things like, what faces the roof and the orientation, and we'll ask things like, are you planning on doing any upgrades in the future? Because that goes into whether or not we need to make the size of the system different. Things like, are you in an HOA? That's a big one. I'll say that's one that I get people that say, oh my gosh, I'm in an HOA, they're not going to ever let me. And now you start to see them, like you said, popping up in HOA areas too. And it's like, oh wait, so I can do it, but wait, I'm not sure how I can get in trouble, this and that, and kind of like these concerns. And they're warranted because HOAs are there's a nothing against the people that are out there that are, HOA board members. There's great stuff that they do, like the trash and the snow cleaning, but, there's this kind of fear of I can't paint my door this way. I can't do this that way.
People worry that could be the case.
That could be the case, right? And so with an HOA in Virginia, they can't stop you legally. There's a solar act that was passed, and you're legally protected to get solar as a homeowner. However, that's something we talk about because with the HOA a little bit, and I think it's something that it comes up usually later in the conversation because they are allowed to get it regardless. But the HOA can say we want you, as long as it doesn't limit to the point where the solar isn't effective for them. They can't say, well, we don't really want you to use this part of your roof.
Oh, okay.
And then that could come into the conversation.
Because then if they say that on a part of your roof that would be highly efficient, it comes into the calculation of how much you'll get from the solar.
And then you can go back and forth with the HOA, and eventually, you're going to get the solar, but you may end up with an HOA making some concessions, which is something that comes up. So this is part of all that discovery, and then we go to building, which is on the discovery, how much you're using in your energy, and we need the utility bill. This is something that's very, very critical in solar. And I think there's some hesitancy because there's private information, but really honestly, not to be mean about it, but that address information, all that information that's on there, it's public knowledge.
Yeah, you can find it.
You can find it, right?
Heck, if you bought the house, the record is there.
Yeah, the realtor knows it, right? The mortgage broker can get it. Yeah. It's on Google. So, but if we have the utility bill, we can build a system. And if we build the system, it's going to be more accurate because we know what you're using. And we can't even actually, we can't build a system without a utility bill because the utility company needs that information, that meter number and that other information on there for us to be able to actually do the net metering and tie it into the grid. And we don't do, just so people know this, the Solar Fi guy at the moment, we don't do any off-grid. So it's all on-grid. It is the most common right now. There's a lot of reasons that people consider off-grid, but on-grid has all the benefits if you were to add a battery, because then you can tap into that. Yeah.
So it makes sense to be. Well, plus, for a lot of those net metering and the other benefits, you'd have to be on the grid. There's, like you said, there's probably personal or private reasons that people may have to be off-grid, but you've lost the ability to sell the energy back.
You lost that big benefit, and you lost the whole what happens if your system does have an issue and the grid is up. Sure, we're concerned, hey, I want to get off of the grid because the grid is faulty, and, there's some value to that, but, what if your system goes down? Now, we have warranties and stuff, but your system could still be down. So it's best to have redundancy. Yeah. Not a or, but an and.
That makes complete sense. Makes complete sense. So, Zach, this has been great, man. We could spend,
very informative.
We could spend hours here.
Yeah.
But I think the best thing to do. So, what's the best way for people to get in touch, to reach out, to find you guys, to really connect and learn more, or reach out to start that process?
Yeah. So text, email. So solar.fi.guy@gmail. Emails are great. Love emails. Text. Everybody likes text. I find these days that a lot of times people don't have time necessarily for a call unless they can fit into their schedule, so text is good. I actually prefer text, and then I love to talk to somebody after the fact, just scheduling for everybody. 202-460-7985 is my mobile. Also on Instagram at solar.fi.guy, and that's at Instagram.
Super easy. Super easy. Solar.fi.guy, either on Instagram or at Gmail.
Or on Gmail.
Or at Gmail.
Or on my website.
Or on your website, exactly.
TheSolarFiGuy.com.
TheSolarFiGuy.com. So very easy to get in touch.
Which is the blog is TheSolarFiGuy.com, and then SolarFiGuy.com. I have a website. They're both attached, but they're two sites.
Okay. And you can probably easily get from one to the other.
Yes, you can.
Fantastic. Well, Zach, this has been such a pleasure. I've learned so much.
Thank you for coming on, Ian. Yeah, teaching Alex and I all about this. This is
really
incredible.
Appreciate it.
Well, you're
Thanks for
welcome.
joining
I'm
us.
glad to be here. Thank you guys both. I was planning to see Nick today. I was a little disappointed.
He
you know.
got back
It's all
so
right.
late from his vacation. We were like, I'm not sure he's
Yeah.
gonna make it in the morning.
He's still full on the pastas at Adelante, you know. He's fine, yeah.
Okay.
But next time we have you on, he'll be here. We'll
I'd
even
love to be here again.
push pressure him to host the show that day. We'll be like, hey Nick, guess what? You're co-hosting today.
I would love that. Actually, yes, I would love that.
You say that now, but once he's co-hosting, you wouldn't feel that.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Sure, it's not that bad.
Well, thanks so much for
Thank you
joining
very
us.
much,
It's been a
Zack.
pleasure.
Thank you guys both.
All right. So as Zach rotates here, we're gonna switch over to our finance
To our finance topic,
Our finance
yes.
topic
Alex has
of
been
the day.
dying to talk about these banks.
I
and
mean,
whatnot.
what's more fun to talk about than
Than
banks, right?
Banks.
I mean, it's like
we all love banks, right?
Such a thrilling business model. You know what? Banks are one of those funny things, right? When things are going well, it's the most boring thing in the world.
Exactly.
Right?
No, you don't think twice about a bank, but
Yeah.
then when things are going bad,
When things are going bad, it's like the
We hate the
most
banks,
news, like panic-worthy thing. It's like bank failure. It's like, oh my goodness,
Exactly.
it's, the sky is falling kind of thing.
you know, it's funny. I actually remember reading something somewhere, and one person said you have to look at banks like the Monopoly game does, because apparently there's a rule in the Monopoly game where people used to ask, well, what happens if people playing and there's all money and the bank runs out of money, and the Monopoly rule says the bank never runs out of money. They'll just you just use other paper
use
bills.
piece of
But
paper
the
bill.
bank never runs out of money. So going into that topic, Alex, we've had was it Silicon Valley Bank this week?
Yep. Signature Bank in New
Signature
York.
Bank, and then just yesterday was it Credit Suisse?
yesterday, and First National.
First National.
is we had touched on this very briefly on the I Love CVille show, which is at 12:30 every day. So be sure to check that out with Jerry. So First National Bank is a little different because it's not so much that they are on the verge of bankruptcy already. Their shares have been tumbling because on the stock market because there are serious questions. First Republic.
okay.
First Republic. Thank you, Jerry.
There's been a number of banks that have been.
So First Republic,
shares
it's a
falling.
more of a shares falling thing. The Feds have not come
Okay.
into that bank.
So they haven't
yeah.
really declared bankruptcy. It's just that their shares are falling so much that people are panicking about it.
Yeah,
Is that what it is?
apparently there are some concerns about
Okay.
it, and the shares tumbled. They tumbled on. So what's today? Friday.
Today's Thursday.
They tumbled on Monday, and then spiked on Tuesday because people were not nervous again, and now
Okay.
they are falling again. So it's
Falling again.
one of those things that they do. And then Credit Suisse is the latest.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. It's one of those things where each of these you could point to and has a different cause. Therefore, you could look at it and say each is a one-off event and they're not connected. But of course, the fact that they happen consecutively
Exactly.
shows, I think, a weakness and a concern in the banking sector. I mean, to run through them very quickly, Silicon Valley Bank, you're looking at tech depositors who began to need their money back, combined with a bond portfolio that was in long-term bonds. So for those who don't know, when the Federal Reserve raises interest rate, the price of long-term bonds, when rates go up on long-term bonds,
They
the
drop.
price comes down. So, and they were leveraged 7 times, meaning, for those who don't know how leverage works, you have these bonds that you bought. You go to person B and say, I have these bonds. Will you lend me money with these bonds as collateral? Sure. You take that money, you buy more bonds. You go to person C. I have 2 sets of bonds. Would you lend me money with these 2 sets of bonds as collateral? Person C, of course. Do this. Person D, right? So you do this 7 times, right? Yeah, you have a lot of bonds, but you also have a huge amount of debt.
So there's no restriction to how many times these banks can leverage?
There are restrictions, but apparently this is within the restriction. Now,
Wow,
what should have
7
been
times is
happening?
within the
What should have been happening is that regulators should have been watching this, particularly the San Francisco Federal Reserve, but apparently they were a little bit off the ball. Whether or not that's because someone on the San Francisco Reserve was on the board of this company is
I'm sure that-
speculation.
yeah.
I'm sure it had no connection
no influence,
whatsoever. But that's their purpose, is to be looking out for this. And of course, once the thing with leverage is when things are going well, you make more money than ever before. When things are going poorly, you are now on the hook for much more money than your original investment. because you've borrowed on this investment. So that was their issue.
Now, what's been the government's response? Now they're saying that they're going to, the Fed's going to cover up to $250,000 deposit for every person, or
FDIC
more?
already covers that.
Okay.
So basically what they're saying is that FDIC and the Federal Reserve are promising to make the entire all the depositors whole for all of their money. So in other words, typically if you had $1 million in this bank, if you were a tech company with $1 million in this bank, you'd be good for $250,000 no matter what. Okay. They're saying we will make you good on the $1 million by basically promising to provide liquidity to this bank for everything that they owe with their bonds as collateral, but using the cost value of the bonds, in other words, what they bought the bonds for, not what the bonds are currently worth. So it's a bailout without being called a bailout, essentially. Yeah. It's saying, Michael, we know that you bought these bonds at $1 million. They are now worth $250,000, but don't worry, we'll lend you $1 million based on these bonds being originally worth $1 million. And you and I sit there and say, well, they're not worth $1 million now, right? But they're lending as though they were still worth the original price, thereby assisting them to make good to the depositors.
Yeah, but does that mean that Silicon Valley Bank is going to still be around, or would they still go under?
It looks like they're going to be sold, and then basically those assets can then be distributed. Now, obviously, the assets are not sufficient to make the depositors whole, hence why the bank is going under, right? But the Federal Reserve then will say, well, these bonds are worth this, and eventually they will be worth that again, as bonds do mature at par. So in other words, if you buy a 10-year Treasury, it may be worth 90 cents on the dollar now, but in 10 years you do get the dollar back. Yeah. The question is, should the Federal Reserve be lending based on 10 years from now? It's a thorny question.
Especially when they're trying to lower inflation. You're spending more money.
You're creating money out of thin air, despite the fact that you're raising rates, essentially, because the Federal Reserve, it's not as though they have this money sitting in a bank account somewhere. They will probably make it out of thin air. Which would be somewhat at odds.
Yeah, it feels like you're contradicting what you're trying to do in the first place, which is raise interest rates to lower inflation, but now you're also spending money, which is going to shoot up. So
exactly. And Xavier makes the good point that the credit quality of treasuries are better than anything else.
Okay.
Right out there. So in other words, it's not as though there is no credit quality to in other words, these bonds are at risk of going bankrupt because they're United States Treasury bonds. Yes. The losses that Credit Suisse is looking at, that SVB is looking at, are because the bonds are worth less because interest rates have gone up. Okay. So it's what's called interest rate risk, not credit risk. Credit risk is the guy you borrowed from doesn't pay.
Yes.
Interest rate risk is, why on earth would I buy a 2% bond from you when I could go and buy a 4% bond now? So your bond must be worth less.
Now, can I ask you a question, though? Will that have an effect on other banks? Because when other banks might be doing that, invest in long-term treasuries, and now with interest rates shooting up,
I think that is the basis for a lot of concern out there. In other words, SVB may have been one of the most poorly managed. In other words, they may have done a particularly bad job.
You leveraged too
managing,
much.
Maybe they leveraged too much. But they are not the only bank that in 2020 and 2021 was probably buying long-dated Treasury bonds, which makes sense in the sense that, if they're offering interest rates, let's say they're offering their depositors, 0.25% on a money market, maybe a savings account. What were you getting in 2020? Maybe 1% you did that in a savings. They need to make money, right? They make money by lending, right? But also for the required reserve, that 10% that they need to hold as assets, by buying Treasury bonds. Now, if you're a bank, you want to make money, you can either be really safe. You could buy 3-month Treasury bills, which were yielding 0 to 0.25% in 2020, which means you're like, I'm not making money, right? I'm breaking even. Or you'd say, I'll take the risk. Rates aren't going up. It's the middle of a pandemic. Why on earth would rates go up? I'll get a 10-year Treasury bond at 1-point-something% and I make the difference. Yeah. Now it's coming back to bite them, and there's a number of banks that I suspect are facing this issue. Now they're not all on the verge of going under, right? Because most of their depositors are not tech companies trying to pull the money out. They may not be leveraged 7 times, but it is a concern because that's probably on their books. It's probably there. And I highly doubt SVB is the only bank that had long-dated treasuries.
Okay, so switching to SVB to Credit Suisse, what happened in there?
They're a little different. There's a number, because now we're looking at a Swiss bank, right? And they've had a number of issues. Again, looks like there's some mismanagement of the books. The Swiss central bank, essentially the Swiss National Bank, has been looking at this and saying, like, you guys have issues. They approached, I believe, the Swiss National Bank last year and said, we need some help because our books are in bad shape.
Well, I also heard that they had paid up to $1 billion in fines or something like that, or penalties.
Yeah, they've had a number of scandals in the past couple of years. And so these two things combined, their assets are already shaky. You have scandals. Now people start to want to leave your bank. Because especially since, let's remember, Swiss banks, rather notorious for big money people who don't really want a lot of notoriety to put their funds in these banks.
Swiss banks and Cayman Island banks, right?
Island, yeah, exactly. Cayman Islands maybe more so. Cayman Islands, you're trying to I want to avoid taxes. I don't really care if people think I'm sleazy. Swiss is I'd rather people don't even know who I am, kind of thing, right? So you really don't want to be in the news if you're at a Swiss bank. They've seen a lot of outflows from Credit Suisse to UBS, which is another Swiss bank.
Okay.
So UBS, I think last year they had a very large, I think it was 30+% increase in depositors. So good chance most of those people are coming over from Credit Suisse, right? So the issue is if you are Credit Suisse, you have a bunch of people pulling out their deposits, your assets are really not in good shape. You already knew they were in bad shape. And now your biggest backer, who was the Saudis, strangely enough, hit 10%, because if you think about it this way, right, the Saudis had a commitment to back this bank up to 10% of the bank's total assets. So when the bank has a lot of people having money in this bank, so if you think about it this way, right, let's say, to make it simple, they had billions, right? But $1 million, you're a bank, you got $1 million, and you got one guy who says, I'm giving you $100,000, but I don't want to be more than 10% of your total thing, because it's too risky. I don't want to be I don't want most of your bank deposits to be me, because then if you go under, I lose everything, right? So you got $1 million, you're fine, right? Now let's say people start to smell your money out. Now you only have 900,000, and the Saudis are like, now I'm more than 10%, and you go to the Saudis and say, could you give me some more money to back me up? And the Saudis are like, I'm not giving you more money because I'm already 10% or more of your total assets, and that's a commitment I didn't want to make. Right, now the Saudis are saying it's a regulatory issue. I don't know enough to know if that's a Swiss regulatory issue that no bank can have more than 10% as one person, or a Saudi regulatory issue, meaning,
we just created this issue because we want to back out.
The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is regulated by the Emirates or the Sheikh or whoever runs Saudi Arabia, right? So it's really the same people, but it's my right hand says to my left, you shall not put more than 10% in a bank, right? So I don't know whose regulatory issue this is. The Saudis are saying it's a regulatory issue, but they basically came out publicly and said, we are not giving Credit Suisse any more money. So you imagine what this does, right? There's one thing if I come to you privately and say, Michael, I'm not lending you any more money. Right, sorry, right. It's another thing if I did a bullhorn and go out in the Charlottesville downtown and say, I am not lending Michael Urpí any more money, just so you know if you happen to be invested with him. Everyone else is like, oh gee, if they're not lending, I'm out too. Yeah. So it now looks today as though they may also be receiving like the Swiss National Bank is basically saying, we will make good and lend you what you need, provide liquidity. They use the term provide liquidity. Which means we will lend you the money you need to stay afloat, which is, again, a bailout without being called a bailout. So that's
would this have any influence on American banks, or is this something totally unrelated?
That's the truth. I mean, regional bank shares, it's a great question. Regional bank shares have been struggling on the markets. I think the issue is this gets people nervous, right? And it's hard to blame people for getting nervous because you have 3 banks in a row that have gone under, a 4th in First Republic. Thank you, Jerry, for correcting me. It's not First National. They are, for all we know, in excellent shape. It is First Republic. Their shares have been plummeting because there are concerns apparently about them. What these are, I'm not familiar enough to know what particularly are the concerns there, but obviously there are concerns about their books as well. They have not had a run on that bank, but the share price is not good.
Can I ask you a question, though? There's been a number of banks. I'm not going to name them, obviously, but there's been a number of banks that I've been looking at that's like they've been going at 30, 40%. Is that all correlated?
That's the nervousness. That's basically people begin to get nervous. Should I be owning this bank stock? Because remember the way it worked for the bank, right? If a bank does go under, I believe the order is number 1 is going to be their depositors. Number 2 is going to be, in other words, if they go under and they have to sell off their assets, you get your money back first if you're a depositor. Second, if there's some secured things. Third, if you've got bonds. Last is stock. So if you were sitting there saying, I own this bank stock and I'm nervous about this bank, even if I don't think they're at imminent risk of running out of money, maybe I sell. And when everybody sells,
then people
price
begin
plummets.
And then that's when people begin to say, maybe I should pull my money out of the bank. And then
exactly. Now again, I caution people, the average person, not to be particularly panicky here. I will use, you said it, so I will use the line, Mr. Potter isn't selling, Mr. Potter's buying because he's panicking and we're not, right? So you don't necessarily need to go run on your local bank and pull your money out. The average person does not have $250,000.
You don't want to leave the Bailey saving and loans with Mama Dollar and Papa Dollar left.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Especially since, if you run the regional banks out of business, then you are left with JP Morgan Chase, which is now it's one bank, right? And your other, what are your other
Bank of America?
Bank of America,
Wells Fargo.
You're basically left with the huge national banks, which is not how you want. Like, there's a purpose for regional banks, right? You want your Bailey Savings and Loans, you want your Mr. Anderson Bank from Trapped in Paradise, helping out the local community, right?
Exactly.
So you don't really want to be doing that, particularly since you are FDIC insured. At that point.
And you had mentioned that on Jerry's show. It's very important to make sure your bank is FDIC insured.
Yeah, that you do want to check. If for some reason your bank is not insured with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that's a question mark.
Yes.
Not saying you want to immediately pull your money out.
No, but it's something to think about, for sure.
It
is
something to think about because you are not entitled to $250,000 per creditor, per depositor at that bank. So, but again, the average American is not sitting there with over $250,000 in one bank. So I would not be extremely panicky. You know what I mean? And now, what this may mean for the markets, what it may mean for bank shares. If you are if you have ETFs and stuff that have a lot of banks, or you particularly own Wells Fargo Bank, or I'm just using, there's nothing wrong with Wells Fargo, but like if you own bank shares, stocks of banks, maybe something to think about just to figure out. Am I overinvested? Like how much? Have you thought about what percent you are invested in banks? Because regardless of whether they go under, this is a difficult environment for banks to make money. It may not be good to be too heavily invested.
Yeah. And I think people are probably the next few months and maybe a year, probably not going to be putting much money into the banks now at this point.
It's tricky. The market is obviously going to be very nervous about this. And I think the underlying issue that kind of paints all this anxiety is the Federal Reserve. We are beginning to see the repercussions of raising interest rate. The first person to see them were people going out for mortgages, right? Now it is beginning to trickle into the banking sector. Do we now begin to see that slowdown, which we have been expecting, right? Because when you raise interest rates, the Federal Reserve is intentionally slowing down the economy to try to squash inflation. There is always a lag time between, everyone knows this, except perhaps the people at the Federal Reserve for some reason, but everyone knows Federal Reserve raises rates, months later, maybe a year later, plus you begin to see the repercussions in the economy. Are we now seeing the next set of repercussions? and we are looking at 0.4% month-to-month inflation in February.
I know it's still pretty
high.
yeah.
And yes, you're going to see 6% CPI is lower than 9% a year ago. But that is 6% on top of last year's 9%.
Yeah,
it is not that prices went up 9% and now they went down 3%. That's not what happened. Prices went up 9% and now they went up another 6%. Right? So we are still seeing persistent inflation.
At what point will the Fed? I mean, you can't obviously think for them because I mean, you don't even want to be in their head.
Exactly. I mean,
but you try to avoid that. But at what point do they say though? At the same point, it's like okay. At the same time, we don't really want to push ourselves into, I don't want to say recession, but push ourselves potentially close to it because we're just trying to fight inflation when really your efforts are proving to not exactly have the impact you thought they would.
It's tricky. It's just part of it is also psychology. I mean, will the Federal Reserve, are they capable of admitting that it's not working as planned? Would they consider that an admission? Would they consider that admission to have people begin to doubt the Federal Reserve's efficacy? And they really don't want that. They don't want people
we've been doubting that for years at this point. But
I know, but I think we might be the exception there. I think most people are probably like, oh, well, it's the Federal Reserve. They're not gonna like completely mess it up, but they don't think they want people to start thinking that. It's a tricky one because it goes down to deep psychology. I mean, I might use to quote Dark Knight Rises. Thinking is a strong word to use around the Fed. So it's tough because Powell, I mean, the issue is I think we can't gauge it by is the Federal Reserve willing to risk recession to stop inflation because they have indicated they are.
Yeah.
Their view is you slowly slow down the economy. You have a soft landing.
But they haven't slowly done it. They've been raising interest rates.
No, but in other words,
very
their goal is to make the economy slow down where we have a small recession that happens slowly as opposed to a crash because of big inflation.
Yeah, but I feel like they're not slowing the brakes fast. It seems like they're trying to slam
exactly.
on it.
At what point are we in crash territory
exactly.
now? I mean, at what point have you nosedived the plane to prevent the engine from going out? You're still nosediving. So that is, I think, the concern that we're looking at, and I'm not sure there is an answer. It's very difficult to predict. I mean, the European Central Bank just raised rates this morning. So Credit Suisse did not spook them from raising rates in Europe. Will SVB and Signature Bank spook the Fed from raising rates in the U.S. or no?
Is it possible everyone's mentality is simply that, well, if they go under, we'll just print more money and bail them out?
That could be. It could be.
Their natural reaction is like, well, not everything is too big to fail, so hence everything that goes under, we'll just print more money and bail it out and problem solved.
It could well be, but then you get into the moral hazard of do you just encourage even more risk taking? Because every bank begins to think that they will be bailed out. In which case, when you actually can't bail them all out, theoretically, can you? You could theoretically bail them all out, but at what point does the average person say, you have bailed out so many banks that this dollar is worthless?
Yeah,
it's worth nothing, and then you have a real problem. But I'm not sure we get there. It's a difficult question. So I hate to leave the audience with more questions than answers, but that's kind of where we are at this point. I would still say panicking, even in the worst of times, helps no one.
Yeah.
It does not help you. It does not help regional banks. It does not help the local economy. So do not panic. You can be prudent, right? You can begin to be more cautious, right? But panicking gains you nothing, even in the worst of times.
Yeah. And as you said, if your bank is FDIC insured, then if you have less than $250,000, you're fine.
And in a high inflation environment, you if the dollar really declines in value, switching your money from a bank deposit to cash is not going to help you tremendously. No. It's not. So that's kind of
wow. We covered a lot.
We did. Today. We covered a lot today. It's been a good conversation. Some great questions on the banking thing. I wasn't sure what questions you were going to go for, but you did a great one. And Xavier himself.
Thankfully you were there to answer them.
Xavier himself could not have done better.
Xavier would have been answering the questions. To be fair,
that's true. But
his 2 cents is probably more valuable than my question.
Great. Don't say that. Some great questions. He couldn't have asked better questions.
That I would agree with.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I'm sure he would have had some interesting perspectives.
There you go. A little shout out, Flame Boulouet. watched the show today and said, "Woohoo, Zack at the Solar if I die." So we've got some. He's still getting some props.
Nice.
Still getting props for today's interview. Learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
Very interesting just to see where things are going and then what kind of cost savings there are.
I mean, we've definitely seen a bunch of solar panels on houses all across Charlottesville.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I've even seen them like on slopes. I don't know if you've
not
seen
even
them.
on the roof.
Yeah, just like on
separate
slopes
slope.
on the ground.
Yeah, which is interesting. So I think we'll definitely be seeing a lot of it.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a great day. Next week, got some more 3 great guests.
3?
Next
Okay,
week.
wow.
3. So first off, Matthias Jon.
One
of our great new friends of the program.
Love Matthias.
Is going to be joining us to talk about Matthias Jon Realty. So, I mean, he's always a great mind to really just to ask about how things are going, what he's seen in the market.
Especially now, considering the interest rates.
Yeah,
and
things to think
mortgage
about.
rates, yeah.
Things to think about in the spring. I know a lot of home activity happens in the spring, so we'll talk to him. Going to be talking to Emily Harpster from Sugar Bear CVille. As well as Southern Revere Cellars. So it's a farm, brewery, and winery. I think Sheridan Grime is going to be joining us.
Farm, a brewery, and a winery?
So, Los said farm, brewery, and winery.
Wow.
So a trifecta there.
So you can get a little milk, a little beer, and a little wine. And
I don't know about milk. I don't know about milk.
Farm. I mean, what kind of farm doesn't have
We'll find out.
cows?
We'll find out.
Chickens,
So-
maybe? Eggs?
so-
No.
Maybe. You'll just have to join me next week.
Yeah, well,
You'll
there
have
we
to
go, yeah.
co-host with me
I
next
must
week to find out. So it's going to be a great show next week. Thanks to everyone for watching today. Of course, thanks to Judah behind the camera, making everything work. Thanks to Jerry in studio, correcting me on First Republic.
Yeah, we don't want to be. We don't want to be.
don't want to be liable for like First
exactly.
National.
First National Bank calls us up.
What do you mean we're going under? So
I'll be like, Judah told us that.
And so thank you, of course, for all our great partners, Castle Hill Cider, Craddock Serious Insurance, Matthias Jon Realty, Forward Adelante, and, of course, love being presented by Emergent Financial Services. Love you, the audience. Great questions by everyone today. Thank you, Xavier, for a great question on the solar side. Thanks for Michael for great questions today. Thanks for joining me.
No, it was a pleasure.
Always
fun.
lots of fun. Be sure to enjoy today's beautiful weather, but also catch the UVA game. Best of luck. We will be rooting for UVA to
Sweet 6. Hopefully by next week we'll be talking about taking on Alabama, right?
There we go. That's what we want. Next week, hopefully, we'll be playing Alabama
Exactly.
in the Sweet 16. Or better yet, maybe Alabama losing. We play
Now, you always want to beat the best.
the big
You
guy.
want to beat the
All
best.
right, we'll beat the best. We'll be rooting for taking on Alabama next week. So go Who's today. Thanks to all for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you next week. But until that time, hasta mañana.